Hello, everybody. For all of those of you who are joining us later, let's take a minute, even though we've been chatting for a bit, let's take a minute to talk about who we are, why we're here, and what we hope to accomplish today. But first, like always, I want to thank our sponsors. So let's start by thanking Conductrix. They've been with us from the very beginning. Thank you, Matt, Nate, Ezekiel, Ashley, and the entire team at Conductrix so much for sponsoring the TLC. We'd also like to thank our other TLC newsletter sponsors, including Conductrix, Growth Book, and Ask Why. Thank you all so much for providing your thought leadership. The community really benefits from that conversation. And all three of you, thank you for sponsoring Experimentation Island. And thank you to Convert for sponsoring the amazing Conversations channel. If you haven't taken a chance to go read some of those questions and answer them, get to know your peers in the industry better, I highly encourage you to do so. You might win a prize, but along the way, you get to learn more about others and they get to learn about you. So go do that. And last but not least, thank you, Eddie Aguilar and Blazing Growth. So really quick, this is it. Open ticket sales are now live while they last. So as long as they last, you can have a chance to come to Experimentation Island. Just go to experimentationisland.com and request your ticket. And if we like you, we think you'll make a good mix, we'll approve you. So hope you can make it because it's going to be a lot of fun. All right. Let's talk about why we are here. That still says agentic commerce. God, I have to fix it. Everybody wait for just a second.
Also,
Meet your...
Camilla is still Carlos.
No, it's not.
No, it's
Hey.
not. It's all right.
The TLC username.
Are you serious?
I'm
I
very
was
serious.
wondering about that, but I'm okay with it. I think it's kind of like both. I'm not sure if they're both actually Latin names, but they sound Latin to me. And
That's amazing.
Colombian, yeah.
Okay, it should say, Camilla, your new name is Camilla. It's just your name, isn't it? And I love how it's a different color. You guys, real time
It's fine.
here.
It's fine.
Real time.
It's
All
all right.
right. There we go. Feel great about this. I feel really good about this recording. So who are we and why are we here? And in all of that, I also put it full screen. So now I don't have my notes. Oh my gosh, people. Y'all are being the best. Let's do this. There we go. All right. So as all of you know, we're living through this paradox and a digital shift, not just an experimentation, but also an experimentation. We have more power than ever to personalize, optimize experiences. And at the same time, we are facing harder questions about responsibility, trust, and restraint. So today is not about perfect answers. It's about asking the right questions and the decisions that you all as brands and practitioners are being asked to make every day. So most of you, I hope, have heard about some of the amazing work that Sani's been doing around AI and visibility and trust. And he discovered this real world AI prompt data exposure. And so I reached out to him actually after our last conversation with Namrata and said, hey, we need to do more on this. It was the discussion after the fact was so interesting. Let's do more. And will you be my co-host again? And he said yes. So he's going to talk a little bit about trust failure and maybe the public reaction to what he discovered. Iqbal, I think everybody knows Iqbal, but he talks all the time about responsible AI and algorithmic fairness. So that makes sense to invite Iqbal. He has really deep expertise in how bias and ethics show up inside systems and experiments. And then Camilla, I had the honor of seeing Camilla talk at Conversion Hotel. And she is a experimentation leader in we'll say, sensitive type job with sensitive data. And so bringing that perspective of this like privacy first and highly sensitive industries, it really made sense to invite Camilla. So thank you all for joining. But before we fully dive in to the conversation, let's start, and each of you can add a little bit more about why you think you're here as you answer these questions. But let's start about like when we hear the phrase ethics and experimentation, what does it mean to you in practice? And let me start with Sani.
So, sorry, my daughter called me from the other room. She wants to get here and take some Nutella. Sorry, I had to go off screen for a second. So
Hey,
ethics.
Nutella really matters.
I know. I'm sorry about that, but yes, there she is. Ethics and experimentation. If you have a line, and this is where you're testing to improve your product, and this is where you're testing to manipulate users into buying your shitty product, ethics is somewhere here, and it's as vague as it can be. I know, but ethics is something that is not in the room when you're experimenting unless you invite ethics into the room. So it's not going to just show up on its own.
Wow.
And yeah, that's how complicated it is. That's how complicated I think it is. Also, maybe it's a hot take, but I don't think you can be fully ethical when you're experimenting on people without them knowing on a web.
Ooh, hot take. All right, Iqbal.
So I'm going to quote quite heavily from Olivier Gambelin's book, Responsible AI, throughout. So I'll make a start with the definition as well. So the way she defines ethics is kind of like a moral compass that's used to align decision making according to a set of values. And those values could be stuff like fairness, sustainability, privacy, transparency. So all of those are specific components of ethics, and each of those have a sliding scale. And every single one of us have got a different sort of position on that sliding scale. And yeah, so ethics is like that moral compass to help drive decision making.
Perfect. Camilla?
Yeah, very interesting definitions to begin with. I will maybe start by saying that although I fully can understand the Sunny's point of it cannot be fully ethical or it's hard to be fully ethical. I definitely think that it is possible. It is definitely possible for you to optimize for the right things, but it has to be invited to the conversation, like you so cleverly said. And I do work in experimentation in the experimentation team, but actually by training, my area is actually UX design. And so I tend to see ethics as a design issue, as a system design issue, right? It is hardly that people act in unethical ways on purpose, but it's rather like what is the system around you? What is it built for? What are you optimizing for? Because then ethical considerations become an afterthought rather than embedded into your kind of like default mode in which you operate. So I tend to see it as a design experiment on its own.
All right. Thank you all. Our first topic is about why ethics matters right now. And let's frame the conversation, if you will. Sani, can you walk us through what you discovered with the AI chat prompt exposure? And like,
Preface it by saying it wasn't just me, it was Jason Packer and another friend
yes.
and we discovered something strange happening in that friend's Google Search Console. We saw entire prompts from ChatGPT. Entire, hey, my boyfriend doesn't like me, what should I do? Those kind of prompts. We dug around a little bit and we figured out how it's happening. And then Ars Technica got involved and their investigative reporter figured out that reached out actually to OpenAI and to Google, confirmed this was really happening. OpenAI said, it's not a big deal. Like it's just a few prompts, just a few accounts, which means every single account. Google confirmed it was happening as well. OpenAI said they fixed it, but they haven't. Well, it didn't make me realize because it was obvious for OpenAI and those big tech companies, they don't care about privacy. They don't care about their users at all. They never will. By definition, their job is not to care about the users. So ethics is for us to deal with and not for them.
But aren't they just another brand and a product? And
Uh, I guess yes, but what is their business mission and what are they trying to do? Are they trying to make our lives better or something else?
wow.
It
We don't
wasn't the
know.
only
That's what I'm
leak.
saying.
It wasn't the only
No, no,
leak. There
no,
was a leak
absolutely.
several weeks before that where everyone's private chats were getting leaked on Google search.
Yes, but those were opt-in because people, it was a dark pattern, but people checked the box and
It
those
was
were
a
in there.
dark
So
pattern, which is, yeah, it was really bad. People
it
didn't
was a dark pattern, but
realize
it
they were
was
sharing them. Yeah.
absolutely, I agree with that. It was opt-in. This was someone's random prompt in some random Google Search Console, which like I don't know how that can happen. I
Which
know how
one is
stupid.
worse? Both of them were really bad.
Absolutely, I 100% agree. But yeah, it's not the first one. I think it was the first one that someone proved that they're using Google to search the web. So we'll
so
always have that.
so Iqbal, if from what Sani shared, like this
Yeah.
is, and he believes it's our responsibility. But
Uh,
like from a systems responsible AI perspective,
yeah.
like what gaps are exposed about um how system AI systems are being built by companies like OpenAI and Google, and like how can we govern the data they generate, or can we, or should we have to, or should they have to, or like how does this, are these
So
companies like moving too fast?
yeah, I mean, I think there is an element of like the innovation and this whole thing that I personally hate, which is, oh, ask for forgiveness later than ask for permission. And I
If you
think
just say they can ask from
That our
prison,
fault
as
because
far
we
as I'm
said move
concerned.
fast and break
yeah,
things?
yeah. And I think the way it's supposed to work is that these companies are supposed to have a responsible AI department that are supposed to lay out some guidelines and rules to kind of determine what they can and can't do. There should be some frameworks there. For instance, for a value like privacy, where and I look at it in terms of like a sliding scale. So on one side, you've got completely safe, no issue. And then on the other side, you have illegal. This is really, really illegal. Don't do it. You're going to go to prison. And then somewhere along between that, there's a line, and there's a sliding scale in terms of where where we each one of us would put ourselves. And what these companies are supposed to have are some guidelines to say, here's our line, here's the framework from which to determine whether or not we are partaking in unethical practices. This is
Mhm.
what we should be doing. And it seems like what's happening is because of this whole, oh yeah, yeah, AI, innovation, innovation, we need to move fast. Let's ask for forgiveness later. They're just kind of sacrificing a lot of those ethical principles, and then that causes what's called ethical drift in terms of like you make a little concession that builds, that builds, that builds until you have a major gaping sort of failure, like we saw here. I mean, that's one way of looking at it, but it's basically their responsible AI system, if they even have one, is has failed. That is essentially what I think has happened here.
One thing we should be aware of, these are the same group of companies that was responsible for Cambridge Analytica and God knows how many other
Yeah.
scandals. We cannot expect them to suddenly become ethical because it's probably not going to happen. That's
They're
why I said
also
it's.
they're also trying to bypass this by buying political influence.
I
OpenAI
was
recently hired George Osborne.
I almost didn't
It's a
mention that, but my favorite example is the no sex chatbots for kids law in California that was supposed to be passed, and they were just supposed to say, just make it not do this to children, not harm children. Instead, they lobbied with Gavin Newsom, and he vetoed the bill. It
Yeah.
made me angry.
Yeah.
I'm still angry
This
because of it.
lobbying is becoming
Yeah,
a big part of their playbook. They don't need to
but
worry
yeah,
about ethics if they don't have, as someone just mentioned, the accountability factor through regulatory oversight.
yeah.
Yeah, so there is like there's supposed to be an organization called there is an organization called the OECD, which is an organization for economic cooperation and development, and what they are is like an independent international forum for setting global standards. So what they are supposed to do is set some standards for AI governance for all of these sort of values. What are the values that we're going to have, and what are the rules that we're supposed to follow? And then what we're supposed to have is like a government level sort of set of rules. These are at a government level, these are the rules you should follow. Then at an organizational level, these are the rules that you should follow. Sorry, not on an organizational, at an industry level, and then at an organizational level, and then at perhaps a team level, and then there's an independent, like an individual level. So there's different sort of set of ethical guidelines that exist in each one of those sectors, and they are supposed to be well defined at the government level, at the industry level, and at the organizational level. But sometimes they're not, and so yeah, I think there is an element of self-regulation where at the moment, because they're wanting to go fast, and because the whole AI boom and everything, that there's no real proper regulation happening at the government level, because these things move too slowly. Whereas at an individual level, we're able to shift very quickly with like what our moral position should be.
But also what Camilla said. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so
Please go ahead. You said my name, so
No,
you
what you said, that this needs to be designed. System that controls all of these things need to be designed. So that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, there is also like the EU has AI acts that specify like there is a governmental attempt there that of course like was not established like early enough, and now things are already rolling, but it does establish that there's a certain guidelines that it has to follow. Is very extensive, and but it starts with pretty much saying how that AI softwares, models, whatever it is, they have to specify clearly how are they working to begin with? So how are they getting their data? How are they processing their data? What were they trained on? So then when you use them, you can understand the type of and how accurate they might be, so that you in advance as a user can already kind of like assess the risk, right? Because it is a responsibility, of course, of the businesses and the companies that are creating these things. It is the responsibility of the government. And it is kind of like really, really sad that they bypass all these rules so often. Like many things, even a seemingly harmless piece of innovation can also be used for bad things, right? Even a car can become something really dangerous for somebody that doesn't know how to drive it, right? So by design, they are not safe, but we also have the responsibility of actually like, what are the things that we need to be aware of? What are the things that we need to do? And do them consistently and systematically to avoid us being kind of like fooled and misusing AI as well, because then we are the ones that taking the technology and actually deploy it in our websites, in our services, in our products, right?
Lucas, you have a
Absolutely.
question.
Yeah, I want to respond to something Iqbal said, and it's actually related to what Camilla's saying. I'm not sure the problem is that the law isn't following up fast enough, Iqbal. You seem to suggest that the world is changing too fast and the law can't keep up. But you said earlier, like move fast and break things. For some companies, includes breaking the law.
yeah, not
So, so,
necessarily that.
so even the laws that exist and have existed for a very long time are being broken. So it's not the speed of the law that's a problem. And David said something
Yeah, true.
interesting in the chat. Like companies are going to try find ways to maximize profit. And I think it was you in the beginning who said that the ethics is fuzzy, or no, Sani said that ethics is fuzzy, right? So the moment you draw a line and say this is the rule is guaranteed to be wrong because the ethics are fuzzy and there's
Stop.
always
And it's
exceptions.
changing.
And so then the companies are going to try and find the exception, or trying to find the edges of that, and they will do
Right.
things that are unethical, or do we consider to be unethical?
Bob and weave.
Yeah.
I'm trying to wonder whether this is an unsolvable problem, right?
Well, there is like
Did you try
sorry.
communism and Soviet Union? I think they had a way of solving these problems. I'm not saying that's the way for everyone, but there's a way to solve every
The
problem.
Gulag.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Siberia. A trip to Siberia.
Have you guys tried drinking as well? I find that this tends to help.
Yeah.
I think they tried ketamine, these guys.
Cheers, Sani.
But that,
I
it
did. I
supposes
tried it.
that
It doesn't
no
work.
regu
It doesn't.
some regulation has got to be better than no regulation. We definitely have
Yes.
better regulation of AI stuff, or consequences of it in the EU than the USA has. It's a start. It's not perfect.
Yeah, I think like to the ethics is fuzzy aspect. I think there is an element of subjectivity in ethics, definitely, but there is some area of objectivity there in terms of we all agree that X is wrong or we all agree that this is illegal. Now, when it comes to like what I was saying before, like going fast and breaking rules and stuff, it's kind of like. And this comes to the concept of ethical drift, where you kind of, or the concept of slippery slope. You kind of give in on a little small aspect, kind of go, yeah, but we could do this. It's not a huge deal. But then the impact of that small change, because of this technology that is so powerful and so sort of influential, that could be big. And then as you have more and more of these small sort of shortcuts that you make, you build up a sort of like a technical debt or a sort of ethical debt, which then turns into something much more mountainous. So I guess like and having some sort of rules or having laws to govern specifically a very technical area where you make such and such change to a a model, you need to follow these principles. That sort of thing, um, I don't think is as firmed up as it can be at the
We
government
need better
regulatory.
like frameworks and guidelines around if doing A, then need B, C, D before publishing, for example, or exposing to us, we humans who are going to be impacted by it.
Yeah, and as an example, I'm sorry, this will be the last point on this, but as an example, the very recent LinkedIn algorithm thing where it's biasing, making gender biases. Now, the issue going into it is that they actually don't have gender in the model at all. So what the model is doing is it is biasing or it is favoring certain types of conversations or certain types of posts, which just happen to align with a certain gender, a certain stereotypical sort of group, which happens to be white men. And the problem is that they kind of LinkedIn kind of go, well, we weren't, gender was never a part of that algorithm, but gender didn't need to be a part of that algorithm.
It's
And because gender isn't part of the equation at all, they don't have any metrics in place
to make sure
to
they're not
measure.
biasing. That's right.
Exactly. And this goes to Olivia Gambelin's point in her book, and she makes some really prescient points there, which have just come up in that LinkedIn bias scandal, where she kind of says, well, even if you may not have any biases going into it, you need to put some metrics in place to make sure that, there are no biases when it actually goes out.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Camille, oh, you're already going to say something, but I have a question for you when you're done. Go ahead, Camille.
This is by far, I think, the biggest misunderstanding when it comes to data privacy right now, because I think we all come from this understanding, or like majority of us have reached a certain level of understanding of like kind of like the GDPR related data privacy that we require, right? That it needs to be anonymized, all these things. But in the current status, the biggest threat is no longer only, right? This is still a threat and this is still very serious, only identifying an individual person because of the data, but because of AI systems is taking all this seemingly unrelated data that comes from perhaps many different parts of like your product or your system or moments in which you share the data that you never thought that the AI would actually be able to take some unrelated metrics and actually turn them into patterns and use these patterns to actually then, exploit people's vulnerabilities without it actually being by design or by default, because AI has the ability. So if you gives it the control over the end experience, it might as well do that, things that humans would not be able to actually concretely plan, right? It would take us more time. We would have to like look at all the data, make sure that we're asking the right questions to actually be able to influence this kind of behavior. And in this process, we will probably have the time to actually wonder about the consequences of what we're doing. But in the speed of it, if you give the AI the control, that is the real issue with the data, right? It's no longer identifying people, but like forming patterns at a level that we couldn't before, and actually then exploiting these patterns to the gain of the system.
So
Which is why I said ethics are not in the room unless we bring them into the room.
unless we bring them in.
I mean,
So I,
even before AI. Sorry, Kelly.
no, 100%. The question I wanted to ask you, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but and you're welcome to share as little or as not or as much as you want. But in privacy first industries, we'll say you're dealing with information that, well, frankly, can carry a stigma. Definitely cultural sensitivity, like we were talking about before. Who's true north is who's true north, and definitely regulatory scrutiny. So, how do you recommend we approach experimentation, optimization, personalization, like all of those things differently when you know that the data you're dealing with itself, like in Iqbal's example, they were very careful. Well, we're not going to collect that data because that data is sensitive. But in fact, if you ignore that data, you're running the risk of optimizing towards a predictor, a leading indicator of that data, and then you're biasing the system
Yeah. I think
intentionally.
there is a lot of layers to this, and there is like a multitude of things that can be done and that should be done. But like maybe just to touch kind of like the most high level ones that I think are often also the most impactful is that we kind of like in our experimentation program, we took a step back first, right, in advance. And we thought and we defined what are the principles, the themes, the tactics that we will use, that we will explore, and we will not experiment towards. And we tend to focus on things that are usability, accessibility, clear communication. One of like our primary kind of like signals to say, hey, we should experiment on this is actually listening to people's feedback and trying to then solve their actual problems. So the things that people are saying, hey, I am suffering with this, I don't like this. So basically, it's our kind of like attempt that by design, we're not simply using tactics of, persuasion or urgency or things like this to like lead towards growth, but we're trying to lead towards growth by solving their actual problems, helping them, like not persuade them to make decisions, but like helping them understand the decision that they're
Making it
making.
easier for them to make decisions. So by
All these
focusing on accessibility and usability, the end result is growth.
Exactly. Exactly. So we have a bunch like for us to create an experiment in the team, there is a few metrics that are required and is to say like what is the user feedback? What are in the themes that we selected by advance that we know that our users like, that is really important to them. Privacy being one of them is kind of like already a default kind of, pre check mark, let's say that you have to say, hey, how does this impact privacy? So we keep it in mind by design and we don't think about it later. So I think that this is a great way to get started, but it's not just that, right? Like I think it goes beyond.
Clarify when you say we don't think about it later, it's because you don't have to, because you've planned ahead, you're being proactive instead of reactive.
We still of course do it, right? But it becomes harder. I think that is the biggest misconception in my opinion about ethics is that we tend to think that the people that do unethical things often do it on purpose, right? That they are not good people or they did it because they whatever it might be. But I think you guys even said it before is often this kind of like seemingly small risk that becomes bigger and bigger, or that your morality changes, or people don't understand what they're doing. They're giving their data maybe to ChatGPT they don't understand is going to have this impact. So, ethical shifts happen very often for lack of like strong systems and misunderstandings and guidelines. So we try to prevent that. We of course think about it after as well, but we try to make sure that by default we are concentrating on the things that matter most and not causing harm, essentially.
Do this to all three of you. Do any of you like when you're when you're either experimenting with AI or experimenting in general because of AI, do you change the way, like what Camilla just described to me doesn't sound like something you should only do in a, we'll call sensitive industry. It sounds like if we all did that, if we change the way we design our experiments and plan, Goodhart's law, let's make sure we've got the right metrics here. If we're optimizing to the right metrics, can that be a way to invite ethics into the room, to Sani's point? And have you changed the way you design experiments today compared to the way you used to, say, 5 years ago?
Sani, you're making a face like you want to talk.
No,
So
you go first. You go first. You go first. Sorry.
So I'm a big fan of pre-mortems. So before running a test, kind of like figure out what are the different outcomes that could happen. And when it comes to sort of ethics and ethical impacts, especially when it comes to values like privacy or sustainability or whatever, thinking ahead to what is the worst case scenario that could happen because of what you're going to be deploying, and then from that worst case scenario, work back to what are the metrics that you could collect to ensure that is or isn't happening. So yeah, just basically, but even before that, just documenting what is your position when it comes to a set number of values. Because a lot of companies say, oh, we're sustainable, but what is actually in your company regulation or company rule book when somebody is doing, like when product owners are releasing some feature or whatever, to kind of meet with sustainability guidelines? What are the practices that you're taking? And then just kind of implementing those practices into some sort of a pre-mortem to make sure that whatever it is that we're releasing meets with these guidelines, and how we measuring that we are meeting those guidelines.
It's almost like an ethical operating system you're describing that overrides anything that's related to any individual experiment. And I think that's probably the closest way to doing this the right way. There's not going to be the right way. But how do we feel about, let's say, a company hires an agency? We talked about this morning, Iqbal. A company
Yeah.
hires an agency, and the agency uses some dark patterns. A CRO agency uses some dark patterns, and the tests win. Let's say they, on a subscribe button, they say, "No thanks, I don't want to save money," or something stupid like that, and that test is a winner. It doesn't harm the user. It's not unethical in that way, but it absolutely kills your brand's reputation in the long term. Like, is that also important, like staying ethical as a brand, or do you just say, okay, this is a 2% win, we want to say something like that on a subscribe button, even though we think it's horrible? Like, where's the line? Is there a line for that?
I wouldn't even say that it doesn't necessarily harm the user yet. Perhaps it does, perhaps it does not. But I think that
Agreed.
the question is first asking, I think that there's also this interesting set of like primary principles for ethical behavior research experiments, right? And one of them is like just three of them, which makes it like actually quite easy and prioritize. And one of them is that people's agency cannot be affected. So it's one thing to like inform them so that they make a decision, is another thing to like make it hard for them or stir them. And
Understand. So you're informing them, but you're informing them in legalese. That does not count.
yeah, and informing and forcing are different things, right? Or coercing and or manipulating or making them feel inadequate, making them feel idiotic for doing so. That's different than informing. So one thing is that. Then the second thing is like how hard is it for them to recover from this action, right? So if you are informing them on an action that they actually want, to do that, another way to think about it is that would they want to do that anyway, right? You're just facilitating their process, or they actually wouldn't have taken that action had you not like coerced them into it. And then how easy is it for them to actually like take a step back? And does it actually harm them, the action that they did? So long term or emotionally or whatever it is. If you can say no to all these questions, then your past, even if you use some kind of like intense persuasive copy and tactics might not be that harmful and that unethical, right? But if you cannot say an active no to all these three main questions, then you're in very dangerous territory.
Yeah, and that's from Belmont report that we
Yeah.
talked about, right? Yeah, it's a 1978 report that was made by U.S. government committee, whatever, after the Tuskegee syphilis study. So this is why we have ethics in experimentation, because
Yeah.
some people did some bad things.
Talk
Yeah.
about dark.
It's horrible.
Well, in that case, the very unethical, but we could argue that they were optimizing for learning in a really gross way. But I think what happens with us is we're not even optimizing for learning, we're optimizing for revenue over or growth,
Correct.
profitable outcomes. So how can we, like, I really liked Camilla's framing earlier of focus first on real user problems and solving those problems and accessibility. And, is it as simple as changing our metrics, our goals to make sure that we're being ethical, putting people first?
Who's making that decision? That's the question. It's the person that wants more money.
Well, I think as optimizers, as experimenters, whether we're working as a practitioner with a brand or a consultant or vendor supporting them, everybody has that end goal. But it feels like, to your all's point earlier, maybe it's our job to educate about how you get there and what the leading indicators can be. Like, I think it's really interesting that companies that are sit in those really privacy sensitive environments may have figured it out already. I mean, how many talks have we had about accessibility where everybody says, like, here's the reasons you should do it. And, the last reason is because people need it and you should be a good person. But the truth is, it also works. It converts better. An accessible site converts better. So, like, maybe we need to do a better job of educating our brands, our clients about being ethical. Maybe ethics converts.
It can, it definitely can. I think that that's a really good point. One thing does not exclude the other, and you can have business metrics and aim for increase of conversion. But I think that the risky thing is not that necessarily. That's great, let's do it. But one way to approach it is to maybe have additional metrics that you measure to also have a look on the other impacts that bringing conversion up can have, and this can translate in bad things for your business, actually, that you might not even like be looking at, and also the human side, right? Because
Yeah.
what harms conversion in this page might actually destroy brand trust in the long term, satisfaction, returns, NPS. They can actually buy a lot more, but then return all of it the next day. And then your organization has an even bigger issue because logistically is a lot harder and expensive. And you can be creating all kinds of issues. So yes, sure, let's aim for conversion, let's aim for more sales, but like have the metrics in place and the guardrails, as they say, so that this is like overall, this experience doesn't harm your own business even. And also, most likely when doing so, you're also, if you have, customer feedback, retention, loyalty, NPS, if you're looking at these things as metrics as well, you also know that the potential harm that you're doing to users is like you're keeping an eye on it, systematically as well. And I think that this is also a good way to approach it.
I also think like there needs to be some sort of business motivation to act in ethical ways.
Yep.
And if there's no business motivation, then nobody's going to act in that way. And there's a business motivation to increase conversion. But what motivation is there to, meet with certain sort of values that that a business kind of says they aspire to? So I think without having something intrinsically part of the company structure that says we are a company that values sustainability and we're not just virtue signaling. These are the ways that we should be approaching things. And then there's like a business motivation almost, say like, okay, and when teams meet these regulations or meet these kind of standards, then we'll, I don't know, have a party or whatever, whatever the motivation is going to be. But without that in place, nobody's going to be really going to be gunning for that, especially when they've got this other motivation about increasing conversion rate, and especially when they're put in charge of marking their own homework when it comes to, oh, were you being ethical? Yeah, absolutely, I was being
Look
ethical
at my
actually.
grade card.
Yeah, look at my grade card. And by the way, we made you 10 million pounds, and it was all ethical. So yeah.
So
Yeah, so I think there is like it needs to come into from the fabric of the company, and if it's not, then at a team level, and individual level, and experiment level, you got no chance.
I think there's a positive way to look at AI in all of this. So basically, when a company does something bad, they can do 10 PR things, 10 big PR pushes, and it's going to be buried in Google search results. No one is going to be able to find it. With LLMs treating these entities, whenever you research a company, it will tell you, but they also had this scandal in 1997. If it's small and obscure, it will mention that one bad thing. And this will become more and more important. The small, shitty things a company does will be more visible, no matter how small they are, and no matter how many good things they try to cover it with. So I think that's the motivation.
A
That's going to be
cat
the motivation moving
covering.
forward. It will still stink. Yes, that's what I'm saying. With Google and with traditional PR, it was very easy. I mean, there was a I'm not going to say names, but there was a marketing person, a really it didn't work, Lucas says. Someone got into some legal trouble and then they pushed a video. Let me tell you about that time I got sued, and they did get sued, but it was something like for traffic 15 years ago. But they pushed that to every single channel to bury the real news about them getting in some real serious legal trouble. And it kind of worked.
Wow.
I don't think that's going to work when the LLM is giving you the answers.
No, and the LLM isn't just going to look for your press releases. It's also going to look what like
Exactly.
some
Exactly.
teenager
Yes.
said on Reddit about your brand and their
Yep.
experience with your brand.
And being loud is not going to be as important. Yes.
No.
That is
Yeah.
assuming, of course, that they don't change the algorithms
Uh,
to bypass
well,
this
I have
practices.
another ChatGPT leak story to share. So when what Craig mentioned when they index those chats, I tried searching for that URL, that specific URL pattern, and Sam Altman good. So chats that people had with threads they had with ChatGPT, and thousands of results. And under quote, so it was like a direct search, exact search. Sam Altman bad, zero results. And there's no fucking way
Whoa.
nobody ever searched for anything that says Sam Altman bad. There's
Oh
no way.
gosh.
So they're
So
not.
did you see Corey's thing until they change?
This is influenced already. Don't tell me those fragile ego baby men don't mess with those algorithms. Like there's no way they don't. There's zero chance that Elon Musk. I mean, he does. Like when you ask, I asked Grok once. I asked it something really disturbing. I asked it, would Elon Musk be better at organizing what happened in World War II? And he said Elon Musk has great organizational skills. He would probably do a better job. Yeah, that's how cool he is. So these algorithms don't work for us. They work for six men, basically. And we need to treat them that way.
Oh wow. All right. So we're in this like new frontier. I think we can all agree.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
like people are generating experiments, using Gen AI or using AI in other ways to automate experimentation. So isn't the risk, and by the way,
Huge,
we got it on
huge.
record. Sani said large language models are good. Like we all heard it. It's recorded. It lives on YouTube.
If you know what they do.
But my point is, like, if we're creating these experiments at scale, isn't the risk like the stakes, aren't they like exponentially multiplied? Especially, by the way, Camilla, in sensitive industries. And like, what do we do? Well, Sonny, actually, I want to start with like the AI chat prompts exposure. Like in that story, in that example, is there anything that experimentation teams should learn from what you learned and what you all exposed that they might do differently to protect when it comes to
That,
data and
yeah, that
privacy.
cloud you don't control and sensitive data don't mix.
Say
Period.
that again.
Anything in
Claude
the
or cloud?
cloud.
It's like,
Anything in the
what
cloud that
how did
you
we
don't
bring
fully
Claude in?
control. No. Cloud is, as I said at Conversion Hotel, the middle child. Nobody cares about the middle child. Cloud and
Sorry,
sorry.
Anthropic.
Cloud and sensitive data should never mix. You should never share your sensitive data. That's how we got Cambridge Analytica. Do you want your sensitive business data to be a part of the next Cambridge Analytica or whatever it is? If you do, that's fine. You can go ahead and do it.
Wow. What would you say, Camilla?
That's one aspect of it, right? Like the data that you're feeding the system, where you are like teaching it. But then the second aspect of it is like, what do you use this AI and how much agency do you give it? Like, how much can the AI actually make decisions on your behalf, right? And what kind of decisions can it make? So, what part of the experience does it control? If you give a lot of data and a lot of agency to make a lot of changes, you are possibly quite fucked. Like, sorry, I actually shouldn't say this and be recorded for, um,
Quite okay.
It's
Beep.
fine.
and especially, and this is what I think is also really tricky. And on top of everything that we already know, quite complicated, the added layer is, can you reasonably explain yourself and to the end user what is the AI doing, what data is collecting, how is it using, what exact is going to be the outcome, and that outcome is actually reliable and consistent. If you cannot say yes to this, you should not be giving AI the ability to control an outcome in any way, shape, or form.
Succinct. When you're doing stuff like this at scale, do we have time? Like to maintain, like you described frameworks that we need to be
Yeah.
using, but like, how do we maintain that ethical oversight at that kind of speed and scale where people are like using AI to automate experimentation, which really is in and of itself optimization.
Yeah. So I think when you're going at scale, it's an operational problem at that point, and we're deploying small models, language models, to
Mhm.
solve those a lot of operational problems. So when it comes to when you do have some frameworks and you do have some definitive sort of these are the values that we aspire to, and these are how important they are. These are primary values, and these are the red lines that we cannot cross, and these are the kind of things that we need to look out for. There's nothing stopping somebody to write like a SLM or a workflow to kind of detect these at scale. And as well, you do need to have some people who are responsible AI champions within the company to be constantly checking these, because it's either important to a company or it's not. And if it's not, then just let it fly by and don't pretend that it is. But if it is important, then you would be actually going through and installing these simple sort of frameworks and these simple workflows to catch at least these big problems at scale and avoid all of these ethical debts that you're going to be building up through these small minor infractions even.
So does it all come down to, you described those, like earlier you called it a moral compass, but regardless, you have like these list of values that a company has, ethical values
Yeah.
that they want to make sure if we're experimenting, if we're building AI, if we're building systems or products or features, we follow these goals. Does it come down to knowing how to measure? Like we always ask the question when somebody comes to us, like, were we successful? You have to start by what are you trying to accomplish? How would you measure
Yep.
it? And how will you know if you get there? Do we have to ask those same magical questions of the goals that we have associated with ethics? Figuring out how to measure them?
Yeah. I mean, I think like there's a lot of really good frameworks in Olivier Gambelin's book. So that's if people are interested, really pick up a responsible AI
You're going to put
book.
that
It's
link in the TLC chat, right?
Yeah,
It is
yeah.
in
It's
the
really good, really practical. It gives you these frameworks. What she says is basically you have a set of values. So, for instance, privacy, and then you have a government sort of set of guidelines for privacy, like GDPR or whatever. You have an industry wide one. You have a organizational one. If you got one for your company,
right.
if you don't, then you should write it, and then you should know what your team or individual sort of guidelines are, and based around that, you can kind of decide what is important, what's not, and then after that, you can kind of use a sort of like the pre-mortem approach, like I was saying, where before rolling out certain things, you'll know after you've rolled out a
Come
few
on.
that these are the problem areas in terms of, like, hey, if we touch something around the algorithm, there's some warning signals there in terms of this is high risk. And if we're doing something around the UI or clarity or whatever, that's low risk. But if we're doing something around algorithmic search engine changes or personalization or whatever, that's going to be high risk. So we need to put some extra sort of things in place to make sure that what's the worst that could happen? How can we make sure that the worst doesn't happen, or if it does happen, we catch it quick enough so that we can, turn it off or fix it, whatever. But yeah, the first thing needs to come with that documentation level and that kind of like going through and really deciding on what those lines are for a company and for an individual.
And also, if AI is involved, if algorithms are involved, guardrail metrics that you need to keep an eye on all the damn time. Like, I'll just give you an
Yeah.
example. Does anyone know what I just read about it? NH Predict is. It's the AI algorithm used by United Healthcare that denied or reversed 90% of claims that were approved by doctors for elderly people with cancer care. United Healthcare is a very well-known company with a used to have a CEO.
With a
You
what?
cannot let that happen.
Did
You cannot
you
let
say with
stuff
the
like that
dead
happen.
CEO?
I'm sure they have a new one, but they bragged about this algorithm that denied or reversed 90% of the claims that were approved by doctors, by human doctors. And that was a goal for them. I'm sure
Oh
they
yeah.
trained that to do this. But if you're not careful, your company can do things that are equally bad, equally terrible. And if you're just not controlling what AI does and what the algorithm does, you will maybe not even know about it.
One of my
And
favorite stories of a medical company that is actually doing a really good job with their experimentation. Do you know what the goal is of every single experiment Mayo Clinic runs? Health outcomes.
health outcomes, yeah.
Try to measure that. It's fun, it's a great challenge, but improving health outcomes is the goal. And that's because doctors are in charge at Mayo Clinic. I love that. So looking at the clock, we have to start wrapping up. And I want to start by and then I want to do like a rapid fire and ask each of you. So now you've got time to think. But ask each of you to share like what is the one thing that either you've done or that you recommend a company do to be more ethical in their practices related to AI experimentation, user research. But as you're thinking about that, I just want to say that, like I said in the beginning, this shouldn't be about having the answers. It should be about asking the right questions. And I think that is our job. And I think all three of you have like brought up a lot of ideas to inspire people to ask those questions. And those of us who do work with brands to build trust, I think that's the end goal. And I think those are the ones that will succeed long term. So each of you, thank you. And if you want to close us out, each of you, what's the one piece of advice you would give?
You said it. Ask the questions, be skeptical, because these are not companies you can trust blindly when you're working with AI in whatever you're doing. You cannot trust them blindly. They need to earn the trust.
Camilla?
For me, it's piggybacking off of that, think critical, think what is a worst case scenario of what it is that you're doing, and then try and determine how do I know that worst case scenario is happening as quickly as possible.
I am going to be sneaky and give two answers in one. Because first I wanted to say, yeah, try to create an experimentation program that is as ethical as possible by design so that it makes sure that you don't have to think so hard, that it's not so operational, that it doesn't like require so much constant thinking and going back. But I think I already said that before. So I'm actually going to be sneaky and give another one, which is at the end of the day, in the middle of all this chaos, we are all going to be using AI and do it responsibly, so on and so forth. But what you can do and what you should do is do not allow the AI to actually dictate the outcome of it, right? Not without human interference and careful one. So I think that this is the first step. We're just not there yet to be able to do this ethically without harming people. And it's not about not using it or being against it, but do not let it dictate what our future will be like, right?
I love that. I love that. Thank you all for a wonderful conversation. And I hope, Sani, cheers. I wish I had something
Cheers.
to toast you here. I'll toast you with my water. Enjoy your holiday break. And for the rest of you, the next time we chat will be a new year, hopefully a better one for everyone. So happy end of year, whatever holidays you're celebrating, and happy new year. We'll see you in January. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.